All right, we are in Mark chapter 14 tonight. Harry, do you have any background on this chapter?
Uh, we're the first. It's basically what they call the last few days of Passion Week. Passion Week is where Jesus, the week of his suffering, and right now we're going to and where Jesus is anointed in town of Bethany.
All right. Verse 1. Now the Passover and the festival of unleavened bread were only 2 days away, and the chief priests and the teacher of the law were scheming to arrest Jesus secretly and kill him. Maybe you want to give a background of what is the festival of unleavened bread and the Passover and how they're separate?
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. And I got the brochure out just to make sure I have that right. The Passover is a 1 day event for the 14th of Nisan in the Jewish calendar. And it's a 1 day event, but it's followed by 7 days for the Feast of Unleavened Bread. But they call it Passover unleavened bread interchangeably because it's an 8 day festival. So the first day is where they kill the lamb, prepare it, and they so that everybody has eats this lamb meal for as a Passover festival. The Passover started when Moses took the people of Israel out of Egypt. So the night that they moved out, they had to take the blood of the lamb and put it on the doorpost of their house, which is still part of this ceremony with that night when Jesus had the last this particular event. But they took that so that's still part of the ceremony. But when the death angel came in Egypt, and every place where there was blood on the doorpost, there was no death in the house. But in Egypt, where this was not being celebrated, the firstborn of the son died in every home and in every barn, the firstborn of the livestock, firstborn of the people, so that they yeah, so there was a great sadness all through Egypt, but a great celebration in Israel because they had no death. So then the people of Egypt sent the people of Israel packing and says, okay, you guys can leave. This was the 10th plague, and they were allowed to leave. So now, but ever since that time, they were celebrating this. And so that is what they were preparing for. The unleavened bread signifies that they had bread made out of strictly flour and water and baked, I guess. And that was kind of hardtack. It was not very fancy bread, but it was the bread they had to take. If they had leavened bread with them in Egypt, and then they were heading out for all, this bread would spoil in a couple of days, and they would have nothing to eat. But being unleavened bread, it would keep for weeks because it doesn't spoil. It's just hard, dry bread. And so that is what they had to eat for this 8 day festival, was unleavened bread. And so it was they ate the Passover lamb, which was a male lamb, a year old. And so they would prepare it during the day. And then when the sun went down, then it was Passover on the day of Passover on the 14th of Nisan. And then they would partake of this lamb. No bones could be broken of. There's a bunch of rules about that. And this would be the festival, and it would go on for 8 days. But the first night is the big supper thing, where Jesus also, which we read shortly in this chapter, where Jesus has the supper with the disciples. So that's kind of the background for what this is.
All right. Verse 2. But not during the festival, they said, or people may riot. Why are they worried about people rioting?
Well, of course, first of all, the city during this event, there's a big event. Supposedly, the city has normally 50,000 people in Jerusalem. The story goes, and maybe this is right, maybe the numbers are off, but that there's possibly 10 times that many, maybe 500,000 people in the city during this time, because the people from all over Israel come to Jerusalem. And they come from all the countries around. So people doing a pilgrimage would also come. So they have a huge number of people there, and they don't want problems during this time. Like that is something they don't, nobody needs. And the Romans don't need, nobody needs. But if the people of Israel, if the Jews are capturing and killing Jesus and the people riot, they're going to be the ones held accountable, and they don't want troubles with the Romans. And the Romans, they play hard, and so they certainly didn't want any trouble with that. So they're kind of quite concerned. And as it is interesting, they say they don't want it during the feast day, and that's exactly how it turned out.
Hmm. Verse 3, while he was in Bethany, reclining at the table in home of Simon the leper, a woman came with alabaster jar of very expensive perfume and pure nard. She broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head. Is there any other place that we read about who this woman was?
Yes, that'll be it's the town of Bethany, and in the town of Bethany we have Lazarus, Mary, and Martha. And this is Mary that's doing this. It doesn't mention that. See, Mark is the first gospel that's written. So the other gospels, they go to explain who this lady is. But this is a short version. Mark is only half as long as the others, so it doesn't go to that detail. But this is Mary, and she anoints Jesus. And it's also kind of interesting that it talks about that this is at the home of Simon the leper. Now, I don't know much about that, but I know that he's not a leper, because he likely got that name because he was a leper. And
Yeah, because we
now,
know anybody with leprosy would have been exiled from the community, right? So the fact that
yeah,
they're all eating amongst them shows that I'm assuming, anyways, that Jesus obviously healed this
that's right.
person.
That's right. So he still kept the name, which was okay. He'd be okay with that name because the reminder of the blessing that he received from Jesus. So he was invited there, and he invited Jesus and all these people, and Mary was there and anointed his head with expensive oil.
Verse 4, some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, why this waste of perfume? So why are they so worried about this perfume being wasted, do you think?
Well, it's as we read further, it's very expensive, and they're just horrified at the expense of it. So yes, go ahead and read the next one.
It says in verse 5, it could have been sold for more than a year's wages, and the money could have been given to the poor. And they rebuked her harshly. So they're thinking in their head, right? Like, this person just dropped, like, I don't know what, in our country, a year's salary, about 40, 50,000, let's say. And she just spent all that money on that where it could have been given to the poor, right? But I find it interesting. I believe in one of the other gospels, it tells us that it was Judas who was the one who was rebuking her. Is that correct?
Yes, but the other disciples were not immune to it. Like they were kind of nodding, as you might say. Judas was complaining, and the others were kind of all on that page. But there's a reason that Mary was really on this topic. First of all, they obviously had a bit of coin, otherwise they couldn't have done this. But see, the brother Lazarus, about 2-3 months earlier, was raised from the dead, and this was such a fabulous event. I mean, all the way around in the Bible, goes in great lengths in the Gospel of John about that. But this is really special, and they are just so happy. But of course, they're prompted by the Holy Spirit to do this for Jesus' sake also. But Mary is and Martha and Lazarus, I believe they were all in on it. We can't prove that, but they just really love the Lord, and they just are prompted to lavish him. And Jesus, as he says, this is highly this is
Quite
highly
amazing. Yeah,
appreciated. Yeah.
for sure. Verse 6, leave her alone, said Jesus. Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. Do you think this beautiful thing was a form of worship, or what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And of course, in the Jewish faith, they used incense and things like that. So this was not totally unusual, but very unusual to do this to a person. But they actually, when Lazarus died, Martha said, you are the Messiah. So they knew before Jesus raised the Lazarus, she referred to him as the Messiah, the
Yeah, she
coming.
said something along the lines of, "You could do anything you want, for God
That's
is
right.
listening to you." Or I'm
Yeah.
paraphrasing, but
Yeah, she actually, now that you mention it, she said you could have healed them, but even now you can do whatever you ask for.
yes, that's what it
So,
was, right?
so she was clear, but she wasn't totally clear. She was still a little anxious, but she knew he was the Messiah. So she really, really loved um
Jesus.
they really loved the Lord, and they were clear this wasn't even Jeremiah or Isaiah. This was the one, the anointed one. So they really, really were clear that this was a special opportunity.
All right. Verse 7, the poor you will always have with you, and you can help them anytime you want, but you will not always have me. How is it that he says that they will not always have him when he promises that he's going to send the Holy Spirit in John? What do you think?
But yes, but of course, physically, they're not going to have him. And he talks about that in the next verse. So, yeah, the thing is, helping the poor is what Jesus constantly told people. Anybody had extra coin, always suggested, give to the poor. He was really, really on for that. But worshiping Jesus and getting Jesus right was by far the biggest thing, because what happened to all the people Jesus healed?
Well, they ended up eventually dying or passing away, right? But we knew, like, I like the example when there was the 10 people with, I think it was leprosy, and only one returned back, right? Which was very key to me. It's like only one really accepts the true blessing, and I believe that person did get spiritually healed, which is the key
Correct.
to it all.
Yeah, because 2,000 years have gone by since these people have all been healed. And, that's all those people have been on the right side of eternity ever since, the ones that really got Jesus right. And the ones that just got physical healing, yeah, that's not good. That's you only got an extra 20 years, maybe 10 years, who knows? The point is that by itself, even when we think about when we're sick, we're looking for healing. No, it's the spiritual healing we got to make sure is right. That's for eternity. Our natural healing is for a year, 10 years, who knows? Doesn't
Mhm.
matter. The spiritual part matters.
All right, verse 8. She did what she could. She poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare for my burial. And it's interesting, right? We see the some parts of God seeing into the future, or at least Jesus seeing into the future here. By he knew his death was coming already.
Yeah, and it talks about here, this is 2 days before the festival. So so he's only 2 days. So the next night would be the Last Supper already, thereabouts. We're not sure exactly how they figure, because it's evening and morning and so on. But they're really, the next day or two is the Last Supper. And so, yeah, this is, and so his body, that ointment would still be on his body when he was on the cross. You could still smell that on him, but when he's on the cross, and he's talking about his passing, and that, so he warned the disciples again, and they still missed it. They still didn't
Mhm,
understand it.
for sure. Verse 9, truly I tell you, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her. And this one always sticks out to me because it's like, it's right here. And
We're
and
doing
to
it.
me, it reminds me of this. It's like, it's the whole gospel, right? Like the whole gospel is Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I think as Christians, we like to choose and pick which chapters we might like the best. But even this part is so important to Jesus, where he says, wherever the gospel is preached, her name will always be remembered. What are your thoughts, Harry?
Yeah, right. We're talking about it right now, and all the things that we do for the Lord will, like, if we're living and walking with Him, that's eternal, and that's beautiful.
Mhm. Verse 10, then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priests to betray Jesus to them. What are your thoughts, Harry? I'll let you take this
Yeah,
one.
it's kind of sad, isn't it? Like here,
Mhm.
Judas was so frustrated with Jesus and his, accepting worship and accepting the waste of this ointment and so on. And he's talking about dying. Oh, Judas just can't handle that. But then again, he chose a path that was inappropriate. Um, like there comes a place and time, like we read, what we have to remember is that I always, to back up 2 steps, well, I always felt sorry for Judas because, to him to be have to be the fall guy, and it just doesn't seem fair that he should have to suffer like this. But we remembered, and I think in John, I'm not sure, that says that he was a thief. So he was already stealing from the disciples and from Jesus as far as a little bit of coin they had. So Judas had chosen to be a compromised individual. And now the Lord hardened his heart. He already had chosen the wrong, had been stealing from his friends. And so now the Lord hardened his heart. So he went forward to be the one, the man, the destructor of the one that betrayed Jesus. And so at this time, he really didn't have a choice, but I believe he had a choice while, before, when he first met Jesus, but he chose to steal instead.
Yeah, it's kind of like I like to use the example like you're mentioning the Passover, right? In the last plague of Pharaoh, we read the first eight that it was Pharaoh's own free will, but eventually he got handed over to the desires of his heart, and God hardened his heart on the last two.
Yeah,
It doesn't really take away from his free will because he was already chose at that point what he was going to do.
that's right. That's right. And so, like, there comes a place where, if we choose sin, there comes a place where God doesn't fight with it anymore. He just lets you go on your way and choose your destruction. And yeah, like, so if Jesus is tapping on your shoulder now,
Yeah, and
take
like we
take
said
it.
the other day, right? It's like if today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts,
Totally,
And
totally.
exactly, and it's what does Jesus say? He says, "Don't fear the one who can kill your body, but fear the one who can who has judgment over where you go at the end of it." I know I'm paraphrasing there,
Yeah,
but it's
yeah,
something important to remember because God is a just God.
yeah.
In our Christian faith, right? Here, this like you talk to a lot of people and they use the word God is love, and He is. He's loving, but He's
Yeah.
also jealous, wrath. There's many character traits of God rather than just the loving part, like we like to tend on to.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. No, if we're on the right side and he wants to help us, he wants to bless us. But if we choose the other path, see, in the Garden of Eden, they had a choice. The tree of life, they had, but they had a choice on the tree of knowledge. And, uh, and they had the choice. And then later on, when Cain and Abel, they each made an offering, and God said to Cain, "Hey, wait a minute." He says, "You be careful." He says, "Sin lies at the door. You have a
Mhm.
choice." And then
Yeah,
you
he
can
says,
choose
"Don't you
life.
know if you do good, you will be rewarded for it?"
Yeah, he had a choice. And we all have a choice. We all have a choice every day. Well, until, if we say no enough times, after a while, God says, forget that. That's my
Mhm.
opinion.
But
So,
personally, I believe he's a lot more patient than we can imagine because myself, it took me a long time to get to that point. And I know you've testified about that too here, where to get to this point, like it's taken you a long, long time and it's been a long walk. So
yeah,
praise the
yeah,
Lord
yeah,
that he is
yeah.
patient.
For sure, for sure. But don't pretend that this will always be. The time is always today. Today is the right day. Next week never comes, and that's the kicker. Like, because next week is next week, and yeah, and that doesn't work.
Mhm, for sure. All right. Verse 11. They were delighted to hear this and promised to give him money. So he watched for an opportunity to hand him over. And why do you, it's interesting that they said that he watched for an opportunity to hand him over, right? Like that part didn't conspire yet. He's like, he already mapped it because we talk about this, right? What's the difference between Peter and Judas in the sin aspect? Because we're even in this chapter, we read later that Peter denied Jesus in front of people, but he said earlier in the same chapter, he says, I will never deny you. But see, Judas here, he mapped it out. He intentionally sinned. He went and he talked about it. And then he waited for an opportunity to act upon his sin. And I think that's a sketchy place to be in. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, like we all pick up dirt off the road. Every one of us, we fall short. I know daily I fall short, but intentional sin is just not okay for a Christian. If we're walking with God, we have to hand over our intentional stuff, the stuff that is that are just make our sin traditions are not okay. Anger, jealousy, lust, unforgiveness, all those things. We do them again and again. That's not okay. We have to come. But we get angry a little bit here and there and other things? Yeah, those things happen. But that should never be a career. If it's a career, we got a problem.
And I also want to say too that like when you are like truly walking with God, like sin is no longer like natural to you. Like before I started walking with Jesus, sin was like second nature to me. I didn't even, really know any difference. But it's when you're walking with Jesus and he truly lives in you, sin is not a natural way to be. It is not a natural, it's not natural anymore.
Yeah, it's like
if you stub your toe on the wall and you accidentally slip up and you say a bad word, that's different. That's different than something that is premeditated and planned, like Harry was saying.
Yeah, for sure. It's the best way we describe it is our desires change, right?
Yep.
You don't want to desire to hurt God. Like you understand the sacrifice that he's made for you and the love that he's shown for you, just so that you can spend eternity with the Father. And if we're going to go around and abuse that, it's not the greatest thing to do, because it's not as much love.
And when you have to go back and you have to repent, like, I know when I have to go and repent, it's like I have my tail tucked between my legs.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't like the way it makes me feel. So I really, it really makes you think twice before you make wrong choices.
That's a good point. Like even today, before we started the Bible study, I always like to pray before, and I knew I screwed something up today. And I stopped right there halfway through prayer. I was like, I gotta make this right with my brother before I go and start praying to God. And like, because I was repenting to God, and I was like, what's the point of repenting to God if I'm not going to change my action? So I right at that point, and that took a lot, because I didn't want to do it. But I messaged the person. I said, I'm sorry for this and that, and it was good. Like it was just like no problem. Like I know he didn't even see it as that. It was something that it was on my fault of the thing. So, but you're right.
Yeah, but the thing we have to keep in mind too is that we think, well, there's all these things I can't do them, and we can't do them to unforgiveness and all those things and anger. He says, well, I can't overcome that, and that's true. But when we come to Christ, He gives us a new nature. He meets us 3/4 of the way, or way more than that, 90% of the way. But we have to participate in it. But the new nature is a God nature that comes to live in us. And if Jesus lives in us, we have a completely different big idea of sin. The problem with poor Judas is that he didn't have Jesus living in him. He had Jesus living with him. But his life was still overcome with sin. Whereas the others, like Peter, who denied Jesus out of weakness, but he loved the Lord. And when he did deny Jesus, he just broke up like crazy because he felt really, really bad about it. But Peter had Jesus in his heart, and he loved Jesus. Whereas Judas, he loved the coin, and that's what he was getting. He got 30 pieces of silver. That didn't satisfy him very long.
No, because he ended up giving it back at the end of it all, anyways. Verse 12. On the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, when it was customary to sacrifice the Passover lamb, Jesus' disciples asked him, "Where do you want us to go and make preparation for you to eat the Passover?" So we see that this is probably, he's been walking with his disciples roughly 3 years at this point. And, I'm sure they've celebrated many Passovers together before by what we're reading here, right? So this wasn't like a random question or anything.
This would be the fourth one that they would have had together. And so they would just know that this was a normal thing, and he just needed to know where to go this time. Like, because Jesus had no house, they didn't, just wonder whose home they would go to or where they would do this. But obviously there was always some place, and it was a new place. It wasn't the same place as the last time. We'll get into that in the next verse.
Verse 13. So he sent two of his disciples, telling them, go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him. These are pretty vague instructions, right? I've always noticed that. It's just like, you're going to see this guy walking with water, follow him. They're going to be like, what's your thoughts?
Read the next verse.
All right. Say to the owner of the house, he enters. The teacher asks, where is my guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?
Yeah. So why did Jesus give vague descriptions as to where these two disciples, Peter and John, in another gospel it says that why did he give Peter and John a vague description as to how to find the house?
I would be guessing because Judas was there with them, and he wanted to have Judas arrest him, not on the time where he spends his Last Supper or the fellowship with his the ones he truly loved, right? So with that saying, I would say Judas was there, and he was like, if he finds out where this is all going down, he's going to come and get them to arrest them at this point. Just as we read earlier, Judas was waiting for an opportunity.
Exactly. That was two verses back. So yes, so Jesus gave a description, and so a man carrying a jug of water. There aren't that many men carrying water jugs, mostly women doing that. And so with the house he goes to, he says, go and prepare there.
And verse 15. He will show you a large room upstairs, furnished and ready. Make preparations for us there. Your thoughts?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So the upper room is all ready to go. How come it's available? Of course, part of it is the will of God, but part of it is that Jesus celebrated the Passover one day before everybody else did, because the next day, when the night he celebrates the Passover, that night he gets arrested, and the next day he's on the cross. They don't hang people on the cross on a holy day of Passover. It doesn't work that way. So Jesus and the Pharisees wouldn't go into the Pilate's home, as we read in John, because they didn't want to be unclean, so they couldn't celebrate the Passover. That's the next morning after this. So Jesus was celebrating a day early. So here was a man that had the Passover, his room ready ahead of time. So it was clean, it was ready to go, it was all perfect. But it was ready because he was getting it ready for his own family, for his own group. And so Jesus was borrowing the room a day early, and then all you have to do is clean it up and do it again the next night for the people who owned the house. So it's really beautiful because it wasn't putting people out of the room, because somebody had went to the effort to get the room ready, and of course by the grace of God it was ready ahead of time, and so it was ready for Jesus and his disciples.
Verse 16, the disciples left, went into the city, and found things just as Jesus had told them. So they prepared the Passover. Any thoughts, Harry?
No, they would know exactly what to do there. They get the lamb and everything. All that was really, so the disciples, I'm guessing, are all around in the 30s, early 30s, same age as Jesus, I'm guessing, because they preached a lot of years afterwards. So I'm presuming they're that age, 25 to 35, that age group. And so they're men of family men. They were raised on this concept, so very, very able and capable of doing everything that was needed.
All right. Verse 17, when evening came, Jesus arrived with the 12. While they were reclining at the table eating, he said, truly, I tell you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me. And what are your thoughts about that? Do you think, actually, when we read, do you think Judas was like sketching out a little bit once this started coming out? Or because he did later, he went and gave the opportune time.
Yeah.
Okay, imagine like I'm planning something, right, Harry? And then I'm planning to do something against you. And you say to me, I know you're planning to do something against me. Like, that's a little, I would probably be skeptical of doing it,
Yeah, no, he had he had the money in his pocket, he had the job to do, and he was clear. He was so frustrated with Jesus. Remember too that he rode into Jerusalem a few days earlier on a donkey. And what did Jesus do? They were wanting to crown him to be king of Israel. And Judah and Jesus says, "No, we're not doing that." You know, like they were all singing Hosanna to the highest, and thought, well, this is going to be the opportunity that Jesus is going to claim the throne. And what does he do? He overturns the tables in the temple and tells all these people they're a bunch of losers. And you know, like he just aggravates and annoys all the Jewish leaders
Yeah,
instead of
he says to them, "You've made my father's house a place for robbers, a den of
yeah.
robbers."
Yeah, and so Judas would have been pretty frustrated about that missed opportunity, and now he is spending a year's wages on an ointment for himself. You know, like you know that he's okay with that. And
Mhm.
Judas says, "Oh my goodness, like this is not this was not." Judas was frustrated, and again, he'd been frustrated for a while, but this is all going the wrong way. But then again, Satan is crowding him, and this is what's next.
Mhm. Verse 19, they were saddened, and and one by one said to him, "Surely you don't mean me." And we were talking about this earlier, right? Like the difference between intentional sin and non-intentional sin, where they're like, "No, no, not us, not us," even though they all, in a way, betrayed him that day by running away or denying him, like Peter. Though it's a lot slighter and a lot lighter of a sin, but in their own way, they did do this.
But the thing is, what's really interesting is they felt convicted. They didn't recognize Judas. They like, you know, if Jesus had have said that, they say, "Oh, I know who that is. That's the Judas guy over there," or
Mhm.
whatever. But they didn't. They says, "It's not me, is it? It's not I." You know, they're really, really concerned that they you know they can't visualize themselves doing something like that. So that is they really they've experienced Jesus enough that not even to trust themselves appropriately, but betraying him. Jesus doesn't necessarily know what that the disciples weren't maybe totally clear what he meant by that. Judas was, but the others they felt convicted, and that was a good sign.
Verse 20. It is one of the 12, he replied, one who dips bread into the bowl with me. You think like the writing couldn't be more clear on the wall, like you're saying, like he gives it to the person who's going to betray them, and they were still confused.
Well, he says one of the ones that dipped. So he wasn't pointing him out specifically.
That's a good
Is
point.
one of the ones. So he says one of the 12 that's actually eating at my table and dipping bread in my bowl in the bowl with me.
Doesn't it say though in another gospel? Doesn't he say the one who I give the bread to?
Yeah, quietly from Peter and John, they had a little signal between them who it was, but the rest of them didn't see that. So
Hmm.
yeah, there was a signal, but they didn't understand. And even when Jesus in another gospel says, "Go and do what you need to do," they thought he was going to feed the poor or something like that. So they really. But then again, we have to keep in mind that if Jesus opens our eyes, we're going to see. And if he closes our eyes, we're not going to see. Jesus told the disciples 3 times all the horrible things that were going to happen to him prior to this week. And it says in Luke, it says, and this was all hidden from him because he hid it from them. He said it, so it's on record, but they didn't understand. And that's the way it is in our life too. There are things that the Lord is hiding from us that he doesn't want us to see yet, and other things he reveals to us. So if he reveals it, praise God. If he hides it, praise God. He has a
But
plan.
with that being said, I want to express to the fact that I believe it's something that we should be actually begging God. Not many things I
Yes,
believe that we should beg God for, but this is one of them. Like, is
yes.
spiritual blindness is for real. I've experienced in my own walk, in my own life, like you're saying these things. And a lot of the times when I've been revealed things is because I asked and I realized and I said, I know I can't see without your permission. And I know I can't do anything literally without you. And that comes with a lot of humility, right? So when we do that, I believe God, it's something very important.
That is true, but if Jesus, if he's got in mind for to hide something from you for another 5 years because of something, a plan he has, like you take, I believe that when Nicodemus came to Jesus in John 3,
Being
and
born
he said,
again, right?
"He born again," and he says, "Oh," he says, "that's confusing." And Jesus says, "You're a smart guy. You'll figure it out." He didn't say that, but but he was, So when did he figure it out? He figured it out at the cross. He was one of the two that buried the body of Jesus. I don't believe Jesus wanted him on the team yet. He wanted to leave him for 2 years until the time he needed him, just like he needed Judas here to betray him. He needed Joseph and Nicodemus to bury him. They had to have people with prestige and power that they could get the body of Jesus from Pilate. You couldn't, the
Yeah,
disciples.
you couldn't be just a regular Joe and going to Pilate to get these
No.
things done. But it
So
reminds me of something that you're saying, Harry. It's like, when he said you're born again, he says, you're a smart man. You're the teacher of the law. Like you should figure this out, right? But I think Jesus does that type of stuff too, to leave us stumped, to always, we use this expression, right? Like how a lot of us, we like to put on when we give somebody a drink of water in the Christian faith, which then like the water is Jesus or the gospel, we like to use the fire hose example where we just splash them with more than what they can handle instead of always giving them a little bit and a little bit at time and building a nice connection.
yeah, yeah, and so anyways, I'm really like, yeah, Jesus hides things and he displays things, but only as we need it. He doesn't hide truth from us, but there's details he doesn't show us till later, and that's his, and we just have to be content with that. That is always so. Them not understanding it was Jesus' plan.
All right, verse 21. The Son of Man will go just as it is written about him, but woe to the man who betrays the Son of Man. It would be better for him if he had not been born. And if that's not a warning,
Yeah,
I don't know what is.
it's just sad. Yeah.
Verse 22. While they were eating, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take, this is my body." And what is the reference that he's talking about here?
That's communion. He's describing communion. Of course, they've had a meal together. They've had this Passover meal and so on. And he finishes it with communion as we know it today, where the bread and the wine, the body of Jesus, the blood of Jesus as a token participation. That's what he's talking about.
All right, verse 23. Then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank from it. Your thoughts? Same thing?
And I think that is accurate that they all drank from it. I've really studied all four gospels carefully, and I do believe that Judas was at the communion. He also participated, which is interesting. You wonder, but that's as I see it.
Verse 24. This is my blood for of the covenant, which is poured out for many, he said to them. And what does he mean that is poured out for many?
Yeah, well, many, any that'll come to him, it's available. Jesus' blood is what gives us our salvation, prophetically, or whatever you want to call, symbolically, I guess the word for it. So for many, but not for all. It's only for those that participate in our walk with God.
Verse 25. Truly I tell you, I will not drink again from the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God. And what are your thoughts on this verse?
I'm a little over my head on that one. Yes, I perceive it, but I really think I really can't answer it. I really don't know the answer to that.
All right. Do you know any theories of what other people say, or?
Well, to me, it strikes me that when he's with the Father, but I don't know. I really don't know.
Verse 26, when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. What type of hymns did they sing at that time, do you think?
Psalms, they'd be it actually there, I was looking at that, but not that that's really critical, but it's one Psalm 120. Oh, it doesn't matter. Anyways, no sense. Yeah, like there are certain psalms that they sing at this time in the Jewish faith. So that's what. So,
Psalm
but
113 and 14 and Psalm 115 to 18 is
yeah,
what they do. It's like, yeah, traditional like Psalms
yeah,
about the Passover.
yeah. To do with, yeah, that's correct. Because the Passover is a huge, huge tradition as well as a huge special opportunity. So it is really, really central to the Jewish. Really, it's one of the three main feast days in the Jewish faith. There's Passover, and then Pentecost, which is, and then later on they have the huts. So they have 3 feast weeks in the Jewish faith when all the men are expected to come to Jerusalem, and so this is the first one of the year. And then 50 days later we have Passover, the Pentecost.
Verse 27. You will fall away, Jesus told them, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd and the sheep will scatter. So what are your thoughts about that? Do you think like they're thinking in their head, this must have been a really intriguing night for them, right? Like he's putting a lot of information on them that they can't see or don't know until later, like we've discussed. That your heart kind of goes out for them a little bit. Like this must have been really rough,
Huge.
right?
Yeah, but no, they didn't understand any of this. Like all the way through, they just did not understand this. If they had have understood what Jesus was, like we do, like in the rear view mirror, we know what's going on. They would have been something they would have been half celebrating. Wow, wow, he's going to the cross. He's doing this for us so that we can live. And he's just finishing the project. No, they didn't see that. They saw this whole event as a disaster. They just didn't know how to process it. And so, and just all fall away, and they just find that really hard to take in.
But after verse 28, but after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee. And why did he choose Galilee to go into?
Well, see, that's the event where the disciples, 7 of the disciples, went fishing, and then after they caught nothing all night, Peter said, "I go fishing," and they got in, and Jesus says, "Hey, do you guys catch anything?" And no, they said, "Well, Jesus says, put the fish net on the other side of the ship." How much? Why would that work? But
Yeah.
anyway, so they had been around Jesus long enough that they listened to peculiar requests, and they did that. And then so they caught the whole tremendous,
154 large fish, it says.
yeah.
And then when they pulled it out, they're like, this is Jesus.
So what happened when they got on shore?
They ate, they broke bread, and they had
Yeah,
enough,
so
like almost like a meal again,
yeah, well, the Jesus already had the fish cooking
Yeah.
on shore, and of course that was the event where Jesus kind of forgave Peter for his for the aspect of denying him, and do you love me, and feed my sheep, feed my lambs, and so on. So that's what happened in Galilee. So they did have to go to Galilee to meet with Jesus, and that is the only event that we know of that happened in Galilee. Then of course they had to meet, then afterwards they had to go back to Jerusalem, the Ascension, and then Pentecost. So that was back at Jerusalem again.
Verse 20, Peter declared, even if all fall away, I will not. It's always Peter who speaks up boldly, right? He says, I won't do that. And,
yeah, no, he was totally clear. He loved the Lord. Yeah.
Verse 30, truly I tell you, Jesus answered, today, yes, tonight, before the rooster crows twice, you yourself will disown me 3 times. And doesn't it say the rooster crows 3 times, or
yeah, it
in the
does.
other gospels?
That's what it says here too. Yeah.
It says before the rooster crows twice.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, I am sorry. No, I'm not sure on that. Sorry, good question, but I wouldn't say. But the point is, when does the rooster crow?
Early morning.
Yeah,
I'm assuming,
very
right?
early. Yeah, very early. Yeah, they're just barely, the sun's just barely shifting the daylight, and the rooster starts crowing. So, sorry, go ahead, Courtney.
I'm so sorry. I think that it says in the other gospels that when the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times.
That's probably it. Yeah, because I always get this part confused. I know it.
Yeah, we talked about this last time.
Yeah.
And it was no, I wasn't with that man, and I'm not with them. And then the third time.
Yeah.
Thank
Good.
you.
And also gives us an idea what time Peter left. So he was there for the whole night's event at the and then this is about 4 to 5 o'clock in the morning that the rooster crows. So Peter stuck it out for a long time. That was a long night for Peter.
Mhm. Verse 31, but Peter insisted empathetically, even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you. And all the others said the same.
Yes, all the others were clear on that. No,
Do you think even Judas said that?
no, Judas wasn't there then.
Oh, he's already gone, right?
Yeah. Jesus sent him away when they were finishing up. So no, they were clear that no, they'd rather die with Jesus, and they were clear on that. And just like you and I are right now, if somebody said, "Well, would you die for Jesus?"
In a heartbeat.
Yeah, but
But when the stuff
no,
happens, right? I know we're so weak, right? We're so weak.
no, because if you have the right circumstances, we get weak, really
Mhm.
weak, peer pressure, all this kind of stuff. And and that's what he was dealing with, peer pressure, because all these Roman type people were
Yeah,
like
chaos just happened.
and Jesus, it's the whole thing is tough. Yeah.
Mhm. Verse 32, they went to a place called Gethsemane, and Jesus said to his disciples, sit here while I pray. What are your thoughts, Harry?
Yeah. So he was going to go praying. So he said to his basic disciples, there's 11 minus 3 is 8. So sit here and I'm going to go pray. And then the next verse, go ahead.
All right, he said in verse 33, he took Peter, James, and John along with him and began to be deeply distressed and troubled. Why did he only take Peter, James, and John?
Because on all the special events like the transfiguration, when he raised a girl from the dead, at different times, he wanted the disciples with him. He wanted them to observe the agony that he was in, because those 3 disciples, because everything Jesus did was always witnessed by a group of people. And that is something that's really, really special about the Christian faith and the whole Bible for that matter. Every event had many witnesses, even when the soldiers were posted at the grave. And without that, we couldn't prove for sure that the angel came and frightened the soldiers away. So the whole Bible is proven again and again. So what we have here is that Jesus was demonstrating, was wanting people to see his suffering.
Gillum, we are in Mark chapter 14, verse 34. My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. He said to them, stay here and keep watch. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So he's like he was terrible suffering. You can imagine what is ahead of him for the next few hours. Huge suffering and pain. And really, there's about 15 to 20 hours of terrible suffering ahead for Jesus right now.
Mm-hmm. Verse 35, going a little. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I'm just saying that I have to leave right now, a few minutes early. So I will see you guys tomorrow.
All right, sounds good. Have a good night. Verse 35, going a little farther, he fell to the ground and prayed that if possible, the hour might pass from him. Why is he praying if possible? That's a tough one for,
Yeah, well, so he realizes that that's why he came. This is from time immemorial that he came for this project, but it is still, if you're faced with that kind of agony and also the suffering to be abandoned by the Father on the cross, to suffer for all the sins of the whole world, that's not a small item. That is a huge item. And he realizes that that's not an option, but still he wants to ask, because it is something that is, he just wants to. It's more of a rhetorical asking, but he still wants to ask.
Mm-hmm. In verse 36, he says, Abba, Father, he said, everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me, yet not I will, but what you will. And, this one really helped my prayer life, because sometimes I could, there's stuff in our life that we don't really see that a greater outcome for. And even Jesus here, he didn't he wanted to accomplish what he came for, but he knew the suffering that he was going to have to come through. But the part that I really want to stress is when he says, yet not what I will, but what you will. And do we in our prayer life really say to God, because God knows best, what is best for us, what is the ultimate outcome out of every situation for everybody who we're praying for ourselves included, and all humanity. Do we really pray for his will to be done? Do we really want that in our hearts? What are your thoughts, Harry?
Yeah, we need to. We absolutely need to. Like, if we're not, we should, because ultimately the Lord loves us. So if we're a child of God, he's with us and he wants what's best for us. And even though people like Daniel that went to the lion's den, wasn't what he really planned on, but it turned out really special. And it is important that all this gets to be the plan. So yeah, that is really important.
Mm-hmm. Verse 37. Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. Simon, he said to Peter, are you asleep? Couldn't you even keep watch for 1 hour? And what are your thoughts about that? Because you'd think, like, after everything that just happened, all the weirdness, that they would want to at least be awake for this.
Yeah, he would, but the flesh is weak, eh? Like, this wasn't Peter's plan, but he was weak and he realized he was weak. And truthfully, we're weak too. The only way we're going to have the strength to do what needs to be done is by trusting him and by his strength.
Yeah, and we read this in the next verse. Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And I say this to people, some of the worst days I've ever had as a Christian are days when I wasn't watchful and I wasn't praying. There's this old adage that it says this, a sinning man ain't praying and a praying man ain't sinning. If you can't do both at the same time. So it's interesting to me that even Jesus says this, right? He says, watch and pray. There's some huge value in that, of being connected upwards for any type of trial and tribulation. And this is what I believe is so that we cannot fall into temptation. What are your thoughts, Harry?
Yeah, like temptation, of course, temptations come from Satan, and yeah, we have to be careful. Tests and trials come from God, but temptations from Satan. And with God's help, we'll always find our way through.
Mm-hmm. Verse 39. Once more, he went away and prayed the same thing. Verse 40. When he came back, he again found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. They did not know what to say to him. And they're probably embarrassed by this time, right? Like, he just warned them, and once again, they got taken over by the flesh.
Yep.
Verse 41. Returning the third time, he said to them, are you still sleeping and resting? Enough. The hour has come. Look, the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. What are your thoughts, Harry?
Yeah, no, he is praying. He's had prayed 3 times and suffered severely, and now he's ready to he's ready to face the music.
Mm-hmm. Verse 42. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer.
Yep.
And we're about to, next week, we will be reading about his arrest and Jesus before the Sanhedrin. So if you enjoyed this, we're always going to be doing this once a week. So with that being said, thank you.